Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks.
Today's episode whisks us away to a remote area called Chimney Rock Road in southwest Alberta, Canada. The terrain is a hilly country that lies at about 5,000 feet in elevation. The common trees in the area are gamble oak, juniper, and pinon pine with the underbrush of rabbit brush, sage, and bitterbrush scattered between. The wildlife in the area includes moose, elk, deer, and woodland caribou. The dominant predators in this area include cougars, gray wolves, lynx, bobcats, coyotes, and black and brown bears. It is in this wild and remote setting in which our episode takes place today. Fraser Graham was an avid outdoorsman, and one of his favorite activities was to go hunting. On October 27, 2013, he was heading off to fill his black bear tag. During the past application period, he had entered a drawing for the tag for a hunt near the Chain Lakes in southwest Alberta, Canada, and was awarded a tag. He was excited to go on this bear hunt and had spent several weeks organizing his gear, planning locations, and being giddy about spending time outdoors. Before departure, he ran through his equipment as a final check. He made sure he had his rifle with ammunition, his permit for harvesting a black bear, as well as his hunting knife, but didn't take bear spray. Black bears are common near the Chain Lakes area. In fact, Fraser treated the filling of his bear tag as a day hunt. He had a small amount of necessary hunting equipment with him, and that was it. He anticipated finding a bear, shooting it, and packing it out all within a few days at most. As Fraser scouted around, he looked for bear sign and tracks. The dense brush could have hidden an elephant, but a trained and experienced hunter knows what sign a bear will leave. He methodically searched the ground and glassed any open space he came across for the first part of the day. It didn't take long for Graham to find a nice big black bear. It was only about 100 yards away and was very large and had a dark coat. It looked like a perfect trophy for him, and he lowered his rifle and peered through his sights, focusing on a lethal shot. He squeezed the trigger, and the rifle clapped as the bullet sped to its mark. The shot echoed off the surrounding hillside as the bear, clearly wounded, hobbled into the nearby brush and disappeared. Graham knew that at this close range, and with his experience, he had definitely hit the bear in a vital and deadly spot. It would only be a short matter of time before the wound his bullet opened up in the bear's chest would lead to its death. Most bear hunters would give a bear they didn't see collapse and die at least a few hours, if not the better part of a full day, before they would start tracking the animal. Graham was an experienced bear hunter, and decided his shot looked like it struck the bear in a deadly place on its body, so he only waited about 20 minutes before picking up the bear's blood trail. A little information about bear physiology is in order to understand the predicament in which Graham is about to find himself. Recent studies have indicated that bears have smaller blood cells and more of them than human beings. This trait helps their blood continually circulate during hibernation without developing thromboses or blood clots. It also causes bears to lose blood when injured, which serves as a means to clean wounds by removing infectious materials potentially. When calculating human blood volume, there is a rough formula used, and it multiplies the person's weight in kilograms by 70 milliliters for males and 65 milliliters for females. Now, don't get ahead of me. I know bears and humans are completely different, but to develop a baseline of how much blood volume a bear has, we will use this formula. Let's say a sow brown bear has a mass of 180 kilograms. Using the above formula, we would have the following calculation: 180 kilograms multiplied by 65 milliliters, which would give us 11.7 liters of blood volume. That is equivalent to about 3 gallons of blood for what is considered a small sow bear. This is important to understand because when an animal has thinner blood and a higher volume, the blood on its blood trail may appear to be plentiful and fatal. But due to these unique characteristics of bear blood, could easily mislead any hunter into pursuing a wounded animal thought to be dying when it is merely wounded. This is why bears are known to spring back to life on hunters who couldn't possibly understand the science behind a bear's blood and its characteristics. As a further example, most hunters are familiar with hunting deer and tracking their blood trails. A 200-pound buck, using this same formula, would have this equation representing its blood volume, 91 kilograms multiplied by 70 milliliters yielding 6.4 liters of blood volume. Anyone who has trailed a wounded deer will tell you that any wounds they sustain will quickly clot and stop bleeding. This is due to the fact that they have 10 times the amount of potassium, the vitamin most involved in blood clotting, held in the fat reserves around their bodies. They also have smaller blood cells that are about half the size of human blood cells. This is important because any animal that has smaller blood cells can circulate its blood quicker, allowing for higher rates of exertion. A hunter who is used to seeing deer blood on a blood trail may follow a bear blood trail with similar blood amounts, thinking the bear's wound is fatal, but given the difference in blood volume and chemical behavior may be sorely mistaken. As Graham followed the bear's blood trail, it meandered through brush and bush for a short distance. Graham had no way of knowing that the bear had followed a circuitous path and circled around to lay over its own blood trail, to lay an ambush of its pursuer. As soon as Graham emerged into the ambush location, the brown bear sow attacked him. Graham was so surprised by the ambush that he didn't have time to fire his rifle as the bear bore down on him. He was following what he thought was a black bear, but had mistakenly wounded a sow grizzly. This only added to the confusion, limiting his response to the ambush. The enraged sow quickly closed the short distance between herself and the hunter, knocking him onto his back. Once the bear was on top of him, Graham stuck his left arm out to keep her away from his head. She bit onto it and crushed it as she twisted her head while biting. She continued with her attack and bit him several more times on the arms and on any part of Graham's body that came close to her mouth. Graham had so little time to react, but the one reaction he managed to do was to pull out his hunting knife with his right hand. As the sow bit onto his left wrist again, he quickly plunged his sharpened hunting knife into her neck, opening up a deep gash a few inches wide. Blood sprayed from the fatal wound he inflicted on her neck, and she shrank back in submission to the fatal stab wound. In only a few seconds, the sow's teeth had torn Graham's flesh and opened up wounds that seeped blood all over his body. As Graham's knife wound took its fatal toll on her life, the sow crumpled onto the ground, in death's repose. Graham wasted no time in removing himself from the proximity of the bear. He quickly hiked back toward his truck to seek medical assistance for himself as his blood dripped onto the snow. As soon as he arrived at his truck, he tossed his gear inside and started up the vehicle. Through a snowstorm, he drove several hours to the nearest town he was familiar with, called Nanton. Graham pulled up to the Flying J gas station and walked inside. Graham was covered with blood and bite wounds from head to toe, and the attendees of the gas station stared at him, bewildered by his condition. Graham stuttered that he was trying to drive to the nearest hospital, while the cashier, Bev Sherritt, explained that the nearest hospital was High River or Claresholm. The gas station maintenance worker, Wayne, assisted Graham with his wounds and comforted him. As the adrenaline that had powered him the last several hours faded, Graham began to enter a state of shock. Bystanders offered to drive him to the hospital in their rigs, but the group decided the ambulance would be the best option. They immediately called 911 and requested an ambulance to their location and attempted to stop his wounds from bleeding. The ambulance showed up within a few minutes and quickly headed to the South Campus Hospital in Calgary. Graham's wounds were treated and sutured by the medical staff there, but I could find no source indicating how many wounds he suffered, or how many sutures, staples, or stitches he received. He was released from the hospital shortly after being stabilized to heal at home. When asked about the impacts of the attack, Graham indicated he just wanted to forget the entire thing. Alberta Fish and Game launched their own investigation into the attack on Graham and the death of the protected grizzly. Graham had a tag for a black bear but mistakenly shot a brown bear. This is a violation of game laws, and he could have faced a fine of up to $100,000 and up to 2 years in jail. Upon arriving at the scene of the attack, officials found the carcass of a sow bear weighing more than 300 pounds, apparently dead from the neck wound on Wednesday, October 30th. Brendan Cox, the spokesman for the Solicitor General Ministry, which oversees the Alberta Fish and Wildlife officers, encouraged people to pack bear spray when traveling into known grizzly bear territory. Cox continued by stating that grizzlies are powerful animals, and it is good to hear Graham was not injured more seriously than he was, or killed. Authorities estimate that there are about 691 grizzlies in the province, and there have been 9 brown bear attacks in the province, with 2 of them ending in human fatalities. In the year 2020 alone, there were 4 brown bear attacks leading to 1 human fatality. Given the plot twists in this episode, I am left with a few questions for you. In the Alberta Fish and Game investigation, they cited that the grizzly sow died from Graham's stab to her throat, but don't mention any wound from his hunting rifle. Do you think the knife wound was the only wound that led to her death? Do you think it is possible that Graham initially wounded a black bear, then was ambushed by the grizzly sow while tracking the wounded black bear's blood trail? Do you think that bear spray would have changed the outcome of this attack? Are you surprised to learn that some bear attacks occur too quickly for a firearm to be used to defend yourself? Are you amazed at how tough Graham had to be in order to save his own life? I will be glad to read and respond to your posts, so please post your thoughts in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks.
Today's episode takes us to the rugged and scenic forests of Alberta, Canada. This area has a humid continental climate, which means that summers are warm and winters are long and bitterly cold. The town of Valley View lies just west of central Alberta, and the bush is only about 30 kilometers to the south. Valley View is mostly prairie farmland, but just north of Fox Creek is a lowland forest that sits at around 2,600 feet in elevation. There is thick bush that lines the oxbows in the Simonette River. This area is covered in stands of aspen trees, which are interrupted by muskeg, which are essentially forest swamps. Common animals you might see here are mule deer and white-tailed deer, woodland caribou, moose, and 2 subspecies of wild bison. The predators of this area include wolves, cougars, coyotes, lynx, and bobcats, as well as black and brown bears. On November 13, 2016, 47-year-old Rick Hollingsworth and his cousin Rob were headed up elk hunting. I'm not sure of the wisdom of going hunting on Friday the 13th, but maybe there is some luck to be had there. Rick had an elk tag and was the only one of them with a loaded rifle. Rob was just along for the fun and to spend time hunting with his cousin. Rick had a rather unusual ability. He was a world-class jet boat racer, and in 2015 he won the Jet Boat World Championships, and was planning on defending his title the following year. This form of racing involves high-intensity situations, and requires quick reactions and judgment in order to be successful. The boats can race around the course at around 150 miles an hour, and even a small mistake can make a big mess. Rick was more than successful at it, and described the experience by stating that the adrenaline just takes over, and you need some quick reflexes for jet boat racing. Well, his reactions were about to be put to the test in order to save his and his cousin's lives. That morning, Rick and Rob had just departed their vehicle. They had hiked it about a half-mile from the road when they noticed fresh wolf tracks in the newly fallen snow. As they continued a short distance, about 100 yards ahead of them, they could see a murder of crows cawing and circling a tree. They were feeding on a carcass which was out of the vision of the 2 hunters. As they got closer to the crows, Rick began to load his hunting rifle. It only held 3 rounds, and he slowly pushed them into the rifle as they quietly slipped through the trees. They were expecting to see a wolf or a wolf pack feeding on a deer or perhaps an elk. About 40 yards from the tree above the scavenging crows, the men began to hear a very low, raspy rumble echo through the trees. They were not sure what animal would make that noise, and looked at each other in confusion. It was then that the source of the mysterious bellowing noise made itself known. Rob was a short distance from Rick and immediately began yelling, "Grizzly, Grizzly!" He was slowly backing up and staring toward the tree where the crows were. As the grizzly emerged from the bushes about 40 yards away, it glanced around and locked its eyes on Rob. It seemingly made up its mind in mere fractions of a second as it dropped its head and bounded powerfully toward the cousins. Rick was taken aback when the grizzly's charge was initiated, and he waited a few seconds to see if the bear was bluff charging. By the time it had approached to within about 20 yards, he realized that the bear was not bluffing and was coming to kill the men. He fired from his hip, as he hadn't had enough time to take aim with such a close-range ambush. His bullet struck the bear square in the shoulder, which caused it to change its focus to him and away from Rob. As the bear steamed toward Rick, he quickly worked the action of the rifle and fired once more when the bear was only about 8 yards away. The bear didn't react to Rick's second shot and continued to rumble toward him like a runaway freight train with razor-sharp claws and pointy teeth. The grizzly was spraying blood all over the place and was swiping its paws in Rick's direction as it continued toward him. Rick worked the action on the rifle once more and fired his third shot when the bear was 2 feet from the end of his hunting rifle. The grizzly was approaching so quickly and with such aggression that it could only swipe at Rick as its momentum carried it right past him several yards. It circled around a tree and immediately began to run straight toward Rick once again. Now nearly face to face, the bear again swiped toward Rick, but one of his shots had broken the bones in its shoulder and its paws flailed more than swiped. Rick's rifle was empty, and he knew he didn't have time or space to reload it. Rick yelled and hollered at the bear, hoping it would back down or run away. Rick was terrified and stared into the bear's massive mouth filled with long yellow teeth as it approached to kill him. The only thing he had as a weapon was his now empty hunting rifle, so he used it to defend himself. Rick poked his gun barrel as far as he could down the bear's throat. The bear initially chewed on the barrel of the gun and tossed its head to dislodge it from his throat. The bear was stunned by Rick's creative and quick reactions. It shook its head and stumbled back about 20 yards to reevaluate how to handle this situation. It had apparently not given up on the attack, as it would have simply run away if it had. Rick took this few seconds of opportunity to reload his hunting rifle. The bear was bleeding badly from the prior shots from Rick's rifle. Rick knew that he could not ethically allow an injured grizzly to disappear into the woods to an unknown fate. It may charge or even harm other people. He took careful aim and fired a fourth shot, which caused the grizzly to turn around and disappear into the nearby bush. The entire episode took a mere 10 seconds, but it seemed like several minutes to Rick and Rob. Their entire bodies were overcome with the adrenaline dump of the situation, and nearly losing their lives was overwhelming. The Alberta Fish and Wildlife did a brief investigation into Rick and Rob's grizzly bear attack. The ultimate decision was that Rick's killing the grizzly was in self-defense. No charges were filed against Rob or Rick. They indicated that the bear weighed 800 pounds, which is an enormous grizzly bear. Rick was forlorn about the bear's death, but felt it left him no choice in the matter. He had to defend his and his cousin's life. He admits that he admires bears and would much rather have had the bear survive than the outcome that prevailed. Alberta's grizzly bear population was once nearly completely wiped out, but numbers have recovered, and they now exist in much of their prior habitat. The province has approximately 856 to 973 grizzlies, and is working to grow the populations to their prior numbers. In an ecosystem that held bison, moose, and elk, grizzlies served a very important role in maintaining their numbers by predating on calves, as well as the sick and older animals of the herds. With much of the state covered with ranches and homesteads in current grizzly territory, encounters will undoubtedly increase in coming years, but the Canadian and provincial governments are working to find a balance in human and grizzly relationships. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I am left with a few questions for you. Do you think the bear was guarding a food cache when it attacked the hunters? Would such a large bear have had any problem killing the men after such debilitating wounds from Rick's hunting rifle? Did the fact that there were 2 people ambushed by the bear create enough confusion to allow the bear to be shot? What would you have done if you had the low, raspy rumble echo through the forest? I will be glad to read and answer your thoughts, so post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks.
Today's episode takes us to the remote backwoods of Alaska, near a small town called Glenallen. The Alyeska Road parallels the Alaska Pipeline, which transports 477,798 barrels of crude oil from the North Slope starting in Prudhoe Bay for 800 miles to Valdez. Glenallen sits at the junction of Alaska Highways 1 and 4 and is surrounded by miles of muskeg and lowlands crowded with willow and alder shrubs as well as birch and aspen woodlands. The animals common in this area include moose and caribou. The dominant predators in the area include wolves, black and brown bears. On May 18, 2021, 61-year-old surveyor Alan Minish was marking out some lot boundaries for surveying clients near mile marker 117 near a town called Gulkana. Alan is the owner-operator of his own engineering and surveying company, and this line of work frequently has him bushwhacking his way through the undergrowth on property lines in more remote areas. He is comfortable doing it, and has had many close encounters with bears over the 40 years of his life in Alaska, but nothing anywhere near as deadly as today's. Alan was working alone today, and was looking for a precise point to locate a property pin. He wasn't making a lot of noise as he was just hurrying through his work as fast as possible to get back to other work. His GPS unit routinely squawks feedback to him, so he figured that would be enough noise that any animal in the area would know he was there. He had left his shotgun in his truck about a quarter-mile away and wasn't carrying bear spray, as he was only a few hundred yards from the road and the safety of his vehicle. He was typing in coordinates into the GPS receiver on his transit when he noticed a very large dark object slowly forming in the edge of his peripheral vision. As Alan slowly turned his head, his vision was filled with the shape of the largest brown bear he had ever seen. It was only 30 feet from where he was standing and just appeared out of the dense brush. The instant their eyes met, Alan knew he was in big trouble. The 30-foot distance between them would have taken Alan about 3 seconds to cover, but the bear did it in what seemed like an instant. Alan had time to hide behind a small spruce tree, and he watched, terrified as the bear simply ran through everything between them. The brush tossed and parted as a visual indicator of the bear's approach. Alan pointed the end of his surveyor pole toward the bear, in a defensive maneuver like a knight holding out a lance. The bear swatted the pole away quicker than Alan could tell which paw he used to strike it, with enough force to knock Alan onto his back. The next thing he knew, the bear was on top of him, so Alan reached out and grabbed a hold of its lower jaw. He remembered that when dealing with aggressive dogs, if he grabbed their jaw, they couldn't bite him. The bear twisted its head and caught Alan's hand in its teeth, completely punching a hole through his palm. The next thing Alan saw was the enormous gaping jaws of the bear as they closed around his head. The bear set its lower canines just below his jaw and his upper canines toward the top of Alan's forehead. As the bear bit down, he could hear his jaw and facial bones crack under the pressure. The bear then reset its jaws and placed all of Alan's face and a good portion of his head in its mouth from top to bottom. That is when Alan knew that this bear was huge. Alan could feel his cheekbones popping and crunching. His eye felt crushed, and he thought he must be dead after this bite. As soon as the bear released its second bite to his face, Alan twisted onto his stomach and put his arms around his head. He waited for the next burst of pain and pressure, but didn't feel anything. He couldn't hear anything. No growling or breathing. Nothing. The bear had left Alan as suddenly as it appeared, probably because it thought he was dead. After a few silent seconds filled with terror, Alan turned over and looked around through his left eye. As he scanned the bushes near him for the bear, he worried about it returning to kill him. He could see a rapidly growing pool of blood on the ground just below his head. He knew he wouldn't live very long with as much blood as he was losing, and based on the damage the bear had done to his face. He quickly pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911 to request help. He pulled off his surveyor's vest and his T-shirt and wrapped them around his head and face to slow the bleeding as he relayed information to the dispatch team over the phone. As he lay there waiting for help, Alan could hear noises around him and worried about the bear returning to finish him off. He could hear twigs snapping near him and wondered if the bear was peering at him through the nearby brush. He lifted his head and searched for the bear, but his head would spin and he would collapse again. There was nothing he could do if the bear returned, so he just laid there until help arrived. Alan stayed on the line for 59 minutes, according to his cell phone call log, while waiting for help to arrive. Given his background and profession, he used his GPS to read his precise coordinates, but had a hard time as his blood trickled into his eyes and onto the screen of his unit. He had to pause every once in a while to wipe the screen clear enough to read. It didn't help that his jaw was broken, causing immense pain with each word he spoke. When the first response team arrived, they were surprised and impressed that Alan was still alive given the amount of blood on the ground. They loaded him onto a litter and attempted to navigate their way through the brush and muskeg to the road that parallels the pipeline, but it was too difficult. Alan was loaded up and taken to a local airport where he caught a flight to the Providence Medical Center in Anchorage. A medical response team was waiting for him where he underwent 4.5 hours of stitching and surgery to repair the damage done to his face and head. I've uploaded these images and videos to our Patreon page, linked below, but I warn you they are graphic. The medical team repaired damaged tissue and flushed his wounds of debris as they went. Alan had a crushed jaw and a large puncture wound to his scalp. His skull was visible through this hole. The hole in his forehead just above his right eye penetrated into his upper sinus. Around 100 stitches held together the numerous tears and lacerations all over his face and forehead as well. They placed a medical eye patch over his right eye to protect it as it healed. Concern grew if Alan would even be able to keep his eye after so much damage was done to it. He kept the nurses entertained with jokes as they changed bandages and dressed his wounds. Alaska state troopers scoured the area in search of the bear, to no avail. It was no longer near the attack site, which meant it was not attempting to claim Alan as a food cache. There were no cubs, nor tracks at the attack scene, so the bear wasn't defending its cubs. Alan also says it would have been okay with him if the bear had killed him. He says he has had a good life. He is moving on from the attack and trying to make the best of his life moving forward. He is regularly tormented by nightmares from the attack and suffered symptoms of PTSD when he later returned to the attack scene. He calls the bear Harvey and says that he lives in Alan's head. They say that familiarity breeds contempt, and it is easy to say that Alan entered the woods unprepared because he was familiar with bears. I think you will agree that in episodes on our channel, bear attacks frequently happen when a victim is least prepared or may have overlooked a step in their normal preparations. This unpredictable and random aspect to bear attacks is what makes them so terrifying. It is like our normalcy bias tells us that every other time things have turned out just fine, but Mother Nature's normalcy bias is based on killing, predation, and survival. That is a calculation that we are frequently alienated from in our day-to-day lives. After reviewing the facts surrounding this attack, I am left with a few questions for you. Do you think this attack would have had a different result if Alan had brought his shotgun? Do you think bear spray could have prevented this attack? Do you think Alan may have avoided the attack by making more noise and alerting the bear to his presence? What kind of attack do you think this was? Predatory, defensive, or territorial? It will be great to read your comments, so post them in the comment section below and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.